All right, welcome everyone to today's episode titled "The Bounce Back." Where we'll talk about how we can develop the tools required to bounce back from difficult moments in our day-to-day of selling. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce a friend of mine, Mike. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me, Damien.
Yeah, happy you're here. How's the day so far?
Day's going pretty good. It's nice, hot, and humid over here in Montreal, and
Nice.
supposed to rain, and just never raining. Even though the weather keeps telling us it's going to rain, so we can stop those crazy fires out here in the east.
True, man. Montreal's such a good place in the summer, right? That's a pretty iconic city, summertime especially.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff going on over here.
Nice, man. It's amazing. Well, I figured it'd be good to maybe just start out with a little intro, let everyone know a little bit about you, maybe your story, how you got to where you are now, what you're doing now, and then from there we can kind of dive into the bounce back toolkit a little bit more.
Yeah, sure thing. So I won't try not to get too deep into the woods here and keep it as high level as possible because it was like a long and winding road. But long story short, I've been working in sales for more than half my life. Starting when I was 16, saving up to pay for my school trip to go to Europe while my friends are kind of like, working for their parents, flipping burgers at Mickey D's and doing all kinds of things like that. I was like finishing high school, getting on the subway or the metro, whatever you want to call it, going downtown and cold calling homeowners from like 5:30 to 9:30 every single night. And yeah, it was a little bit easier back then when your rent was paid and your food was paid and you're living at home with your parents, right? But fast forward a couple of years, many different sales environments. Did some door-to-door sales. Left Montreal. I lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania for a bit, where I did door-to-door sales for 100% commission, no salary,
Wow.
selling security systems 6 day a week in the high
Oh
crime
man.
areas of Philly. I did that a year after in Houston, Texas. So yeah, it's exactly what you think it might have been. And then
Oh,
yeah, fast forward a couple more years, ended up working in tech, IT, hardware, software for a bunch of years, and
yeah.
I got to a point where there were some things that I wanted to do, and as the crazy world of sales kind of made me make a couple of decisions to take a step back and start making changes in my day to day. And when I did that, I ended up building what I have today called Train Your Minds, where I work as a kind of a mindset trainer where I provide services to help improve employee well-being and
Mhm.
support company culture by providing workshops and coaching on everything geared towards bouncing back a little bit more effectively and disconnecting and taking a mindful approach to all of it.
hmm No, I think that's amazing. And we've had some amazing conversations prior to this about some of the work you're doing and the alignment with some of the stuff that I'm doing as well. And that's why I think this conversation will be so great today. Um, you've been in the sales game for a while. Rejection is a part of selling. What do you find is kind of some of these main foundational pieces that you help individuals learn when it comes to bouncing back? What is your approach to bouncing back from rejection and difficult times in selling?
Well, my approach is it just makes me think back of how many times we've been rejected. I like to tell people I've been getting rejected since 1999, and started when I was 16. So I just turned 40. So it's been a long time getting rejected for all these times. And I guess how do you kind of prime yourself for rejection? And I guess that was the question, right?
Hmm.
And I think it's easier said than done, right? Most people will advise others or young salespeople to just like, hey, don't sweat it, just like, don't worry about it, don't stress, don't be anxious, just keep banging them out, sales is just a number, keep making those cold calls, keep going, keep going. And I think the biggest problem there, it's easier said than done, right? You can
Oh
just
yeah.
advise someone, you can get them motivated, you can tell them what to do. But I think the biggest issue that a lot of us run into is most of us know what we need to do, but a lot of us don't know what we need to do kind of after knowing what we need to do, if that makes sense. It's like, well,
Hmm.
we know we need to bounce back. We know we need to not allow the last call to affect us so we can keep making those calls, but it does, right?
Hmm.
So I think what's important is being able to take that step back and start understanding a little bit more about ourselves and about some techniques and tactics that we can do in order to be more equipped to follow those recommendations from either ourselves or from others, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, man. And I think about the trickle effect of a bad call or a difficult conversation or a no, and how that can translate into your day. Like you said, that emotion might get bottled up. You might have it in your body language and not even know it. And that's impacting, your calls for the rest of the day, maybe even week, maybe even month, if you can't shake it. Right. So I think it's a lot of the work that we both do is around kind of priming the nervous system so that you can have that elastic band approach of like, okay, you're in this, tough, stressful state. Now, can you come back to baseline so that you can handle the next stressful situation? But I think what happens is so many sales reps, rejection, difficult call happens, and then it's just compounding each call, each call, each call. And then they hit that point of like burnout or anger or stress, and they're just like, it's overwhelm. And that's why I think it's so important, our topic today about bouncing back when those moments happen so that compound effect is not taking place.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what's really, really important, what really, really helped me was the idea of kind of like priming your mind for the workday challenges
Mm.
and getting ready for the unexpected. I think a lot of the time what happens is we just want things to go perfectly in our sales day. We want to get that PO signed. We want to make that sale. We want all our meetings to go great. But the unfortunate world that we live in is the chances of having an absolutely perfect, pristine day are pretty low. And if we go in expecting it, then it becomes a little harder to bounce back. So I think one thing that's really important that I do and I share, and that's really helped me, is to get ready in the morning, prime yourself, remind yourself that although that you want everything to go great today, you want every sales call to be perfect, there is a chance that it might not. And it's a really great first step to bounce back a little bit more effectively. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still going to suck, right? It's still going to suck when you like, wait, you get to work and all of a sudden you check your email, you're expecting that $50,000 PO, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, Mike, sorry, you know what? We don't have the budget anymore, right? It's still going to be very, very hard. But knowing and expecting, not expecting it, but knowing that it is a possibility can give us the ability to be a little bit more mindful, bring ourselves to that present moment and be more rational and utilize an open mind to break things down more appropriately so we can let it go a little bit better and reduce the life cycle of those negative emotions so we can kind of bounce back a little bit more effectively, if that makes sense.
110%. I think it makes perfect sense. And that awareness piece is so important to know, like you said, first of all, this might happen. And then when it does, being aware of it happening, I think a lot of people just get caught into it and they're not even paying much attention to that fact. You'd mentioned there kind of priming yourself for the day. Like, what do you typically recommend for somebody in sales, maybe some tips or tricks that they could do to help prepare themselves for, the potential rejection or difficult conversation that might come up?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, honestly, what's one of the most important things for me is to have a little bit of control in your mornings. And what I mean by that is I'm kind of indirectly trying to say is don't grab your phone first thing in the morning, right? And you know how it was. And it's very, very hard to do because the night before you're like, oh man, you spoke to your client. He's like, oh, he's going to send the PO in the morning. It's going to be awesome. And as soon as you wake up, you grab your phone and it's either going to be really good news or really bad news. And basically, whatever you're going to see on your phone is literally going to dictate the rest of your day. And I think that's something that we fall into that causes us to lose control of the rest of the day. And I think what's important is taking some time before checking that phone for yourself, whether it's, just having a coffee. Like, I mean, I can obviously recommend what I would do personally, but it's a little bit hard to jump into that right away. Like, doing some breathing exercises, start your day with intent, doing a thought exercise of priming your mind for the workday challenges and letting yourself know like, hey, look, I'd love my day to go perfectly, but there's a chance that it might not. And if it doesn't, I'm going to be able to recognize that this is a possibility and try to work with it a little bit more effectively so I can bounce back. But at the beginning, waking up and just checking that and getting that bad news can really cause us to spiral and then enter that workday already with some negative emotion versus taking some time prior to seeing that message, because I know that dopamine rush is there, right? We want that good news. But if we can prime ourselves, take some time that we can control for ourselves in our morning, whether it's having a coffee, taking a walk, getting in some
Mhm.
sunlight, taking a few breaths, just being mindful, getting yourself organized, doing a little something, get a few wins inside of you first,
Yeah.
and then grabbing it. I think that's one thing I would definitely recommend anybody to do, not just a salesperson.
Totally. And I think with that comes a lot of gratitude as well, like detaching from work a little bit too. We identify many with, quota and performance and these types of things as a sales professional. So it's really nice to detach from that. And like you said, get some personal wins in life. And I mean, existence of what really matters, like tuning into that. And then sometimes when you get to that tough moment, it's like, okay, you know what? This isn't that bad at the end of the day. This is not the end of the world at the end of the day, but we can get so siloed with our thoughts sometimes, and it might seem a lot bigger than it is. So I think that's a really, really good point. I love that. So I guess, after that tough call, let's say things don't go as planned. Do you have kind of any recommendation or kind of process that you follow to get back to baseline?
Yeah, definitely. So, Damien, obviously we're big proponents of mindfulness.
Oh yeah.
And, there's a ton of misconceptions of what mindfulness is or meditation and all that kind of stuff, breathing or awareness. But one thing that I find very, very effective is taking a second to breathe and really understanding why we're actually breathing. Because we've all been there where we just like lose a fill and you want to like throw your laptop out of a window and then your buddy next to you is like, hey dude, just relax, just breathe, man, just breathe. And what do you want to say? You're like, you breathe, man, I just lost like 2 grand in commission, I was going to go on a trip or whatever it may be, and you start
Yeah.
freaking out, right? But I think that's something that's very, very effective. And I think what's really important is if we understand what taking a few moments to breathe would actually do for ourselves, for our physiology and our mind and our body, we might be more inclined to do that. So with that said, what I would actually do is when I get into a tough situation and getting off that tough call, is what happens is your body starts reacting in a certain way. You start breathing differently. So taking a step back and taking a few breaths, extending your breaths from, getting it down to about, 4 to 6 breaths per minute instead of the 10 to 15 or 20 breaths per minute of what might be happening after getting off of that bad call will actually help you calm down. It'll activate the prefrontal cortex. It'll
Mhm.
improve your heart rate variability, which is a physiological indicator of stress, right? So if you're doing that and understand the reasons why you're doing that, you may be better equipped to let it go a little bit easier or be able to bounce back from it more effectively. And don't get me
Mhm.
wrong, like I said, look, we're not monks here, right? It's still going to suck. It's not
Mhm.
going to be easy, but by having some tools in our back pocket, we could utilize them because sometimes we get off that bad call, we have a bad meeting, we have to go into another meeting right after, right?
Yeah,
How do
no,
we get our head
totally.
in the game, right? You
Yeah.
can't always execute when you're motivated, right? Obviously, you want to be motivated all the time, but you're not always going to be motivated. So that's what
Mhm.
the idea is what can we do to bounce back more effectively, even if we don't have anything left in the tank, even if our emotions are in the best place, because no matter what, we still need to sell, right? So
Mhm.
that's what I would recommend, man. Just like if you get off something tough, take a minute or two, whatever it may be, and take a few breaths.
Mhm.
And I think it'd be more effective for you or the person taking these breaths, if they're listening and just heard some of the stuff that I said or that you say, is do your due diligence. Go read up on it. Figure out what the breathing actually does. Because if you believe in it after, if you really understand it, you're more inclined to actually say, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm going to sit there and just breathe. It's not going to help me. It just sounds really stupid. But if you
Mhm.
understand the research and the science backed information there, it's like, you know what? Maybe I'll give it a shot. Because in the end, I tell people, it's like, what's the worst that can happen, right? You're taking a second for
Totally.
yourself and breathe for God's sake.
110%. I think the power of the breath is something that we often don't appreciate enough, right? Like to your point, signaling to the nervous system, like everything's going to be okay when we take that breath, right? That parasympathetic, it's soothing. It's saying, hey, it's all good. Everything's going to be fine. And, you know, I think it's worth going into briefly too, that real versus imagined fear element of, being chased by the tiger or the fear that we've created in our minds, right? And this deal not going through, the body's still reacting the same way, right? It's going to that fight or flight state, kind of panicking. And how do we get out of that? The breath is such an amazing way to trigger that parasympathetic, to get us into that, state of being without our emotions kind of taking over. And I think that's really important for sales as well, because when we think about selling, active listening is a really, really big component of that, right? So if you're in your head from your previous call, or you're not fully there emotionally, your active listening will not be there. You will be in another place. And when your active listening is not there, you're not there for the most important individual, which is the buyer. So I think that is also really, really important to discuss as well.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Communication, active listening, and it's so much harder to do it if you're not in that present moment and you're not cultivating more of that mindful presence and things like that. Doing some that breathing and reflection is so key for that.
Totally, totally. And I think when, a lot of people are listening to this podcast, it's, a lot of leaders, reps that maybe are feeling a little bit burnt out, and they're looking at each episode for a couple takeaways that they can like apply into their day to day. Is there like a specific breath work technique or exercise that you would kind of recommend? Like, I know people should do their due diligence, but let's say they're listening to this episode, they're coming out of it with like one thing that they could like apply after that tough call, into their day.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, there's so many different variations, so many types of breathing that you can do, whether it's like to get energized, to calm down, to go to sleep, lower stress levels. There's like the 4-7-8 breathing, the box breathing, or this breathing, that breathing. In the end, I like to just say, just breathe. I mean, what I would recommend was just like, I would do extended breaths, extend your inhales, extend your exhales, and count, right? 4 seconds up, inhale through the nose, 6 seconds out, emphasize the exhalations, get that CO2 out. That's 10 breaths. That's 6 breaths per minute, right? Extend those breaths, set your timer 1 or 2 minutes and just do that. And do that after. And what I would recommend after that is do something that you might enjoy after that. And what I mean by that is, if you have a bad call or any call and you take a second to set the timer after the call, 1 or 2 minutes, and you do your breathing technique, if you do something after that you enjoy, whether it's grabbing your phone, get on it, watch a TikTok if you want. I don't know, your boss, all the bosses will listen to this are going to kill me or whatnot, or get up and go speak to somebody or whatever it may be. Do something, grab a coffee, do something that might make you a little bit, I guess, less upset. And what that does is it kind of, if you're doing this over and over, it's going to convince your brain to say, hey, maybe this is worth remembering. And it'll make you more likely to continue doing this breathing technique more often than not, because our brains are very, very, very neat things, right? And what you're doing here is, once you're getting off a rough call, the last thing you're going to want to do is sit down and breathe. You're going to be pissed off. You're going to be angry. You're going to want to get up and vent or yell or whatnot. So if you sit down and breathe, and then you have to go to the next call, you have to go to the meeting, what happens is it's going to be a lot harder to do this over and over. But if you want to create maybe like a habit or create a routine, I would recommend trying to do this every rough call or every long call or every meeting, whatever it may be, is taking a minute or two to do this, but rewarding yourself with something, either by checking your phone or going to speak to somebody, or having a coffee, or doing something that could actually let your brain know it's worth remembering, and it might give you a better opportunity to continue this even on the days when you really don't want to do it. That makes sense.
No, it makes so much sense. And I think the power of the routine there is key. And also setting that time aside in between calls, right? Like having that buffer, having that 15-minute buffer between calls. People say like, oh yeah, but I can't do that because I'm taking less calls in the day. But it's like, yeah, you're going to be showing up though as the best version of you, probably by taking those breaks in between. So I think that's a really good shout. And I think making the breath simple is also very, very powerful. People can overcomplicate this, to your point about the box breath and all these techniques. It can be overwhelming. It's like, you don't have to do much here. It's just breathing. And this doesn't need to be complicated. And I think people underestimate the power of that simple action. It doesn't have to be this complex thing.
I totally agree. It doesn't have to be complex. And then you're going to realize, even if it seems easy, it's not that easy. And be aware that your mind is going to wander, right? So when you're making that count, when you're counting up 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're holding, and then you're going down for 6, recognize your count, right? Because your mind's going to wander. Allow it to wander. It's that simple thing, and just bring yourself back to that count, and that's going to cultivate more of that mindful presence. So just by doing something simple like that will actually help you bounce back more effectively. And the more you do it, the better you're going to be and the stronger you're going to be. And to your point, sometimes, you might not need it on every call. If someone's like super nice to you and all chill and you're just banging out these calls, sure, you'd be like, hi, yeah, I'm not interested. Okay, great. You bounce back, you get your 3, 4, 5 no's, you do your rebuttal. But if you feel good, you pick up the phone. But if you have this big call and it's really stressful and it's not very good, it's not happening, and you have to pick up the call again, that's where it might be the second to like, you know what, let me take a minute, let me take a few breaths, let me stand up, let me move around, and let me come back to it, because then we're going to be better equipped to be more effective on that call. Because like you said, it's like, we're not always going to be motivated as salespeople, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest mistake we can do to ourselves as salespeople is to think that the only way we can sell, the only way we can be effective, is if we're happy. And that
Mm-hmm.
was a big trap that I got into back in the day. And I used to force myself to be happy. And it kind of backfired on me, right? Because then what would happen if you weren't happy? Guess what? Then you get mad. And then you get mad at yourself for being mad because you're supposed to be happy. And then it just keeps compounding.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you kind of come to that realization, then you can figure out, well, wait a second. When I'm happy, I do well in sales. I have great calls, but maybe it's not the happiness that's the reason why I'm doing so well on the calls. Maybe just the happiness is something that's helping us. And what it's helping us doing is it's helping us be more mindful and present, right? Because if we're happy, guess what? We're not thinking about the sales that we have to do tomorrow. We're not thinking about that we might get fired, or I have to make another deal, the quota's coming up.
Yeah.
We're right in the moment. So then
Yeah.
that was a realization for me. It's like, all right. When I'm happy, I do well, I could sell. But when you realize I'm doing well and I'm selling well because I'm mindfully present, then you can say, oh, now we got something. What could I do to be more mindfully present, more in the moment on the days when I don't have that motivation, on the days when I'm not feeling all jacked up and smiling to start making cold calls? Even when people are happy, no one wants to make those calls either way, right? It's already
Yeah.
hard enough as it is.
Sure.
And that's
Yeah.
what it was for me. It's like, man, it's so hard to be on your game all the time in sales. So is there something that I can do to still execute on the days when I'm not feeling it? And this is where things like we're talking about today, breathing, taking that time in the morning,
Mhm.
will actually help us execute on those days when we're not all jacked up and
Yeah.
motivated.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that's a good segue into maybe kind of one of the final pieces of this conversation is around mindfulness and meditation as a whole as well. And I think people sometimes have some, interesting thoughts come up when they hear about
Mhm.
meditation and mindfulness and maybe associating that with a specific action, such as sitting in the corner and meditating, but understanding that this is mindfulness. What we're talking about is mindfulness. And people, when we talk about mindfulness in sales, it's about doing these types of things. This is not about sitting, on a cushion and meditating for 30 minutes. Sure, that is a act of meditation that is within the scope of mindfulness. But all these things that we're talking about, this is mindfulness. And I think it's important to say that because to people that are just kind of getting into meditation and mindfulness, it can be overwhelming, but they're probably already doing a lot of things that are related to mindfulness.
Totally agree. And just like we're talking about that 4 seconds up, 6 seconds down,
Yeah.
I hate to break it to y'all whoever's listening, but you're meditating, right? So it's just
Yep.
like I'm trying to like tricking you into meditating. You're taking a few breaths, you're breathing in for 4 seconds, you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, you're exhaling 2, 3,
Mm-hmm.
4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. What am I gonna eat for dinner tonight? What the hell am I gonna do? I think I'm gonna have some chicken. I don't want some chicken. Tomorrow I gotta make that sound. Then you'd be like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be breathing. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And guess what? Now you're meditating.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where I guess it's important for us to keep having these conversations and let people know it's like you don't need to turn into a butterfly or start floating away on a cloud. You can do this anywhere you like. The
Exactly.
reason why I tell people it's like the reason why you're sitting down in a corner in a quiet room with your eyes closed is because we're not the best, most experienced meditators in the world. If you're sitting on a street corner and your eyes are open, you're looking around and you're trying to meditate. Now you're seeing all these things. It's so much harder to like not think of other things. If you're hearing people talk, if there's a movie playing or music going on, you're gonna get distracted a little bit more easily, and it's already
Mm-hmm.
hard enough, right? So that's why people think it's like I don't want to sit there with my legs. You don't have to sit there with your legs crossed. I recommend going somewhere, sitting on a chair, closing your
Sure.
eyes, because if you're looking around, you're going to be probably more inclined to think about something and try
Yeah.
to be in a quiet spot. Not because you're like a Buddhist monk. It's just because it's going to be more effective for you,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. Well, I know it makes sense to you, but hopefully it makes sense to the listeners.
Yeah, no, and I think it does. And I think making this simple and making this approachable really is the goal here, right? Um it can be intimidating. This space can be very intimidating to get started in. And I guess this is a nice segue into meditation and mindfulness for that sales rep that maybe is interested in, entering into that space, doesn't know where to start. This breath work is such a great way. So I think that's an
Hmm.
awesome takeaway for any sales professional, whether you are a yogi or somebody that doesn't even know, what mindfulness is, this is something that you can either take as a reminder to do more frequently or to get started with. So I think that's really, really powerful, man.
Yeah, totally agree, man. You can use it as like a fire extinguisher if you need it during the day, or even if you can incorporate it into your morning routine and do it the same time every day if you can, even if it's for 1 or 2 minutes. Like if you're just
Mm-hmm.
getting started, you're gonna start Googling stuff and you're gonna start reading stuff. I gotta do it for 20 minutes, an hour. No, just 1 to 2 minutes, just build that habit, get used to actually doing it and build upon that. We need to start simple because a lot of times what happens is we get motivated, we get excited, and we're like, oh, I'm gonna start meditating, I'm gonna start journaling, I'm gonna start waking up at 5 a.m. and start running and doing all this crazy stuff. It's like, let's take a step back, let's start breathing, let's start focusing our awareness here and use this as a great foundational tool to be a better version of ourselves. Because what it will do is we'll make you a better salesperson. That's most definitely, and just a better person in general.
110% agree with that. And I think, again, going back to the why will this make me a better salesperson? Again, active listening is so, so, so important. And to your point, when the mind is wandering and taking you to different places, if you can get comfortable with having that awareness to come back to the present moment when somebody is speaking to you, you're going to be listening to their pain and their problems more in depth and be able to help solve that, as opposed to thinking about the next call, the previous call, what you said, what you shouldn't say. And that happens to a lot of us. We're not fully there in that present moment. So I think that is such a good reminder as well for the individual and the sales professional, is being there, being present is so, so powerful when selling.
Definitely. Yeah, calming that mental chatter, especially when someone else is talking. And I'm very I take that very much to heart because it's very difficult for me coming up in my career because I have ADHD as well. So that's just coupled with my default mode network never coming down, my mind always going all over the place. It's really hard for me to kind of keep track and do that active listening. And back in the day, you have those misconceptions like, I can't meditate, I can't be mindful, I can't sit down all day, my mind's going all over the place all the time. But it's so the opposite, where it's like, this is the perfect thing that we can actually do to help us calm that internal chatter and get a better grasp on it, especially when we're having those sales calls. Because now the customer's talking, now we're thinking about how we're going to respond or how we're going to do this, that, the other thing, and then we're losing track of what they're actually saying, and we might be leaving some great opportunities on the table. So this is what it's just so effective in so many different ways. And yes, I know it might be easier said than done, but there is a place to start. And I think this is a great opportunity to jump into it for sure.
And that's beautiful. I think that's exactly the goal of this episode of Bouncing Back, is giving individuals an opportunity and a way to do so. And I think that is exactly that in that exercise there of breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But with that, man, I'd love to maybe wrap up just, letting everyone know a little bit more about what you do, Train Your Minds, how they can find you, if people are interested in checking you out.
Yeah, most definitely. You can hit me up on LinkedIn, or you can check me out on my website, www.trainyourminds.com. And yeah, I pretty much talk about what we're talking about today. I provide workshops on how to bounce back and disconnect. I work a lot with sales teams as well, but the idea is take a mindful approach to the daily challenges of the workday, but a real life down to earth approach, bringing in the science, bringing in the research, and making it more logical and coming from a peer versus the PhD psychologist or the 85-year-old Buddhist monk, which I would love to listen to, right? That's my kind of audience sometimes too, right? But not everybody's ready for that. Not everybody wants to hear it from them, right?
Totally.
And I think what's really important is there's not enough information out there that could, I guess, hit every demographic that can receive this information in a way that kind of makes sense for them, that people can actually relate to. Because what I try to do is, like, I provide workshops, on just like we're saying, like one of them, like how to bounce back and disconnect, how to overcome challenges, how to take a mindful approach, communication, whether it's from the mindset to mindfulness to meditation to breathing, habits and routines, willpower and resilience. It's all coupled together. But what's really important is being able to express it in a way where people can maybe digest it a little easier, coming from a person who, like I said, that is ADHD. I make mistakes. I say stupid things. I don't pretend to try to be someone I'm not. I might have a glass of wine too many on a weekend once in a while. Look, it happens, but
For sure.
I have that balance, and it's about balance, about that work-life balance and the ability to better control what to focus on mentally. And that's exactly what I do, is I kind of work with teams and sharing some of these tools, tactics, and techniques that salespeople or anybody can put in their pockets to navigate these crazy days that we go through as a salesperson, whether it's at night, thinking of the sales, or on the weekend, being out with our buddies and always looking at our phone and worrying about what's going to happen on Monday, or what we might have done wrong on Friday. And this is what it's about. So that's kind of
Totally, man.
what I do with teams. And I also work one-on-one with individuals to build build a program and build a strategy with them, and do some mindset training with them as individuals to, develop some goals and work towards getting them to be a better version of who they already are. So that's kind of what I'm about. So you can, feel free to visit my site if you have any questions. Hit me up on LinkedIn, because I love chatting about this stuff anyway. So
For sure.
more than happy to lend an ear or helping hand.
Beautiful. And I'll put a link to your site in the show notes there. And
Cool.
yeah, Mike and I, like I said, we've been chatting a lot prior to this, so I'm sure we'll have some crossover throughout and workshops and different things in the future. So stay tuned. But yeah, man, always a pleasure chatting with you. Appreciate you taking the time here. I think this was very impactful and actionable as an episode. So I think a lot of sales professionals out there are going to listen to this and feel like they can come away with something that they can actually apply into their day-to-day. So thanks for taking the time.
Awesome, Damien. I hope so, man. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Have a good one. See ya.
You too. Take care.